I won't share the actual number, but we estimated that the amount of dollar saving is equivalent to 2 years of salary from both database team and the Mesos team. So we are very happy that our company got our development time free after the project. So that's a pretty happy story. Thank you very much. Everything is already documented on user doc. So if you have questions, you can just reach out to me, Greg, or Trin on this feature. Thank you.
Sweet. Next on our agenda, we have. Yes.
Can we share the link to Hangout in the slot?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's there on the email.
Oh.
Do we still need it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I think it was on the. I think it was in the Zoom chat, and I closed the window.
Otherwise, who's next on the agenda?
Ben M was gonna we're gonna have a conversation about push versus pull gauges. Sweet.
All right, I'll share my screen. So I originally added this item assuming that it was mostly going to be Mesos contributors, but I'll try to make this interesting for other folks as well. So let me present here. I guess that's working, although it's not. Did people read that? I guess. Okay. So we have a built-in metrics library that we use in the project. So when you collect metrics from Mesos, we have a variety of types of metrics. One is a counter. I think folks are probably familiar with the difference between something like a counter and a gauge. A counter would be just maintaining a count of certain events in the system. A counter is basically you can increment and reset, and that's about it. So a counter doesn't go down. It's essentially like someone standing at the entrance to a stadium and ticking their little counter device. We also have gauges. Gauges are an instantaneous measurement of something. Usually we'll use this for maybe like the count of items in a collection or something like that, where that could go up and down over time. And when we collect the metrics, we want to know what its current value is. Historically, how this has been done in the project is we, rather than computing the new value for those gauges on every event that occurs that affects the value, we dispatch to the various actors in the system, and then they do some work to compute those values. And the consequence of that is that when you do some metrics collection, you hit the endpoint, it can actually take quite a long time, especially for large clusters, to get the values back. Users often think that it's expensive, but it's more just that it has to go through all the queues of various actors, and they might be actually a little bit backlogged at the time. So what I recently did was I made this, I renamed this gauge into what is called a pull gauge, indicating that the value is pulled from a piece of the system. And I noted the disadvantages of that, where while it makes the client code simpler for computing the value, there's some performance disadvantages that I just talked about, where it might take some time and you might actually write some expensive code to compute the value. What we're trying to move towards instead are push gauges, where the client code has to push the value in when it changes. It's sometimes harder to write code this way, but what it means is that when you do a metrics collection, you can immediately get all those values, and there's no latency imposed by saying the master be, like for example, if the master is backlogged, it's still immediate to get the gauge values. So I think the plan here is that we want to kind of ban pull gauges from the core actors in the system, like the master and the allocator, and we want to try to move towards push gauges so that when you make a metrics request, you get the response immediately and you don't have to wait. Is that making sense for everyone? Sorry, I'm trying to explain that on the fly. Hopefully that made sense. Okay.
And when does this land or is landed?
When does this land? I don't know if this made it in 1.6. I think it did. So this library is available in 1.6, but the master's metrics are still mostly using dispatching. So we have to do the work still to actually move towards push gauges to improve the performance of the existing metrics. That might happen in 1.7, but we've got to do the work. So we'll see, I guess.
I was wondering, actually, earlier today I was rebasing some metrics to use push gadgets, and I was wondering, like, why do you only provide a prefix operation on the postfix one?
Oh,
Didn't surprise them.
the question was, why does this interface only have a prefix operator? I mean, it could have both, but the latter doesn't act. I mean, I don't know. There's a performance overhead of having the postfix one because it has to return a copy, right? That's the reason.
I have an unrelated question. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's kind of related to metrics, but kind of unrelated to this. Is there any thoughts on exposing metrics in Mesos through using the Prometheus format? I realized, like, for example, we have a bunch of stats that we expose that, for instance, we can encode the metrics name. I mean, encode some of the name, encode some of the information in the metrics name, which essentially should be labeled. And I'm just thinking, like, is there thoughts on like kind of exposing using like Prometheus, which has this label definition, and also it allows us to easy to integrate with metric system like Prometheus or other things that support Prometheus formats.
Yeah, that actually came up. The discussion around labels came up very recently because we were adding per framework metrics. I think for Prometheus, the person who would answer has his head turned to the camera right now. James Peach has worked on some integration for exporting to Prometheus, but I don't think he's listening right now. But yeah, there was some discussion around labels, so I think a number of us could get together and talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did put that on the API work group agenda for the next working group, so we should talk about it in more detail.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, so our company also have interest in that project to even have a person who's budgeted to do this regardless, and we hope it will happen inside Mesos so we don't have duplicate. Going back to the pull versus push metric, just one comment. We might need more testing on the gauge value change themselves if we move to push, because previously we see that the push gauge, like you said, is trickier to write. And I've seen and probably introduced bug that the gauge goes way out of sync with actual data. I think we need more rigorous testing about the change of these numbers.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the implications of the push gauge is that we often have to restructure the code around that data such that all the mutations to it are happening in like a single isolated place where we can modify that push gauge.
Was there something that motivated this change?
Yeah, I think what prompted it was we started looking at per framework metrics. And since there could be a lot of frameworks, we were concerned about the performance implications of the master computing all these values every time the metrics endpoint was hit. And it's kind of been a long-standing complaint from users that sometimes metrics takes a long time to return, and it's often because the master is backlogged a little bit.
Can you show an example of transforming from pull to push?
Do we have any examples?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Yeah, the previous for framework metrics.
Okay.
Let me get a link and say if you.
Work that song, just show it.
Or
Okay.
yeah.
Can I-
Yeah. Let me find it first.
Can I ask one question before you switch the page? Why int here? And why store int internally and the value return double?
It's a good question. I don't remember that off the top of my head. I think the metrics system in general was designed so that fractionals are possible. For gauges, we didn't feel that fractions were needed, but maybe they are. I'm not sure.
For counters also.
I mean, for counters, it clearly didn't make sense because it's a counter. I think that's self-explanatory. But for gauges, one could imagine a gauge with fractional values. So maybe this will need to change. I'm not sure.
What was the original gauge? 1064?
Or maybe it's because you have some atomic operation you want to do, and there's no such thing for double value.
Yeah, it's a good question. We could adjust this though if that's needed. Where?
Yeah, it's an example.
Okay, is this example? Is this a different example? Oh, you're also presenting. Is that you? Presenting?
The one on the left,
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's me.
Whoa.
But we're looking at the same request, basically. I'm just looking at the code and you're looking at the description.
Okay, why don't we use your screen then?
Okay. So we are adding per framework metrics, and one of them shows whether a framework is subscribed or not. It's a gauge with a Boolean value, either 0 if it's not subscribed or 1 if it is subscribed. And what we did is we added it to master metrics as a push gauge, and then we instrumented master CPP. So in some places we set it. So there's a new method called framework set framework state that is called whenever we change the state of the framework, and that method now pushes the value of the gauge here. And basically that's it. Whenever the state of a framework changes, this method will be called, and then a new value will be pushed to the gauge.
Yeah, so the code's been restructured to try to isolate the mutations to that variable, I guess, right? That's what that set framework state is.
Yeah, we already were doing that manually. Now it's done through a method. Yeah.
So that's probably the pattern that's going to come out is the mutations are going to get contained so that we can make sure the gauge is correctly updated, I assume.
Should also probably make it like private or something so that no one else will try to just mutate it directly, like the state.
Well, yeah, we could make it private, but the whole master code has access to private variables.
You
So
have getters and setters. Yeah.
it's, okay, I think maybe that's it. We can give another example, but
Is it different style of example?
do folks want to see another example, or I think it's good?
It's a little bit different. I think it'd be valuable for folks to see if it's exactly the same.
Yeah, 1 minute. June is joining the hangout.
Let me try to share my screen. So this is what I did this morning. So
We can, you're not presenting.
1 second.
how do I? Oh, yeah. So this is a WIP patch to add new metrics, and I used to use the full gauge, where the way we use pro gauge is that we define in the actor, we define a function that compute the actual value, right? And also we declare a new gauge that pass in this callback. So every time someone hit the endpoint, this callback will be dispatched to this actor, and there are some actual computation. And now I move to the push gauge, where I just remove this callback function. Instead, I do a couple of addition, like every time the data structure changes, I manually update the value. So that's a main difference. That's the pattern we're going to move from the old style where we call callback to this new style. That's
But this one, I guess you're looking at every event where,
yeah.
and if someone adds a new event, that I guess they can
Right,
miss.
you need to change that. It's more similar to counter. Yeah. Okay.
What's kind of interesting about this example is that if you dispatch to, if you have a pull gauge, you would dispatch to that storage local resource provider process and have a single, a consistent value between pending and failed. So if you look at the top change, right? So this would be consistent with a pull gauge, but with a push gauge, you can land on 3993 and get a pending and failed, which are not really consistent.
Yeah.
Right.
Like this. So previously in my previous code, I compute the number of pending operation using a pull gauge, and compute the number of finished operation and failed operation using counters. And they are kind of incompatible because.
Well, I think to Benjamin's point, I believe that's still possible with pull gauges, because in between the different dispatches, there could be other events occurring.
Oh, yeah.
That could lead to it not looking like a snapshot. Okay, I guess maybe we can move on to the next item.
Yep. So the next item we have is Andy, who wanted to talk about Mesos source code navigation via cQuery.
Hello.
Hi.
All right.
Andy.
So I've probably asked lots of different people in that room right there, like, how do you guys navigate this source code base? And often I've gotten the answer of you guys use grep, because that's what I was doing for a really long time, especially on Windows where no tools at all work. Some of you guys have gotten some tagging systems like GNU Global and R tags working a little bit, but would have problems with disambiguation and the fact that they were slow and would have to re-update. And as of a couple months ago, there's now actually a really great solution out there that works in a lot of different editors. It's really cool because it was actually some other people at Microsoft and Google working together to standardize this. It's the Language Server Protocol, which was Microsoft's standardization of how do we make source code navigation actions standardized. And they did that for Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio, but there's plugins for Emacs and Vim. And then on the flip side, there were people over at Google working on Chromium for Windows saying, hey, we need to navigate this massive code base, Chromium code base, and none of these other solutions work. So they wrote cQuery, and they wrote it to work with LSP. So I'm going to share my screen here and show I have the same ability to jump tags, get contextual autocompletes and on-the-fly syntax checking and all of this stuff with the same little setup using cQuery on both a Linux box and a Windows box, and it's actually really quite fast. Can I share my entire screen? Full screen. Cool. There it is. Visible?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So the really cool project here is cQuery. It's just over on GitHub. You can see that they originally wrote this for Visual Studio Code, and actually when code started being able to do C++ lookups and completions in our code base, I was like, hey, wait, I need to look at that again. And I worked with the cQuery guys to get it working on Windows with Mesos a little bit. The caveat is that it needed CMake, especially the CMake generated Ninja build system, because it's all in the backend run by this compile command script. But skipping all of the setup, here is on the left my Emacs over on Windows. On the right, my Emacs tunneled from my Ubuntu machine. Same file here, slave test.cpp, which is a really nice file because it's way at the very top with it's included just about everything with process stuff and stout stuff. Everything's in here. And note, just from the very start, if you look over here, over on the Windows machine, the Linux stuff is grayed out. Over on the Ubuntu machine, the Windows stuff is grayed out, which is in and of itself pretty cool. But it also finally started giving us like completions. Like I'm looking at command and I'm like, what on earth is in command? Clear, set, and I can actually start tabbing through this and seeing what these items are. And this works not just over here on Windows with Emacs, it also works with any of your LSP compatible editors over in Linux and MacBooks as well. And for me, it's all the same setup because I use the same editor anywhere, but it actually is fast and clean and nice. And if you notice, before I finished typing that semicolon, I actually had on-the-fly syntax checking on the side there saying, hey, that's not going to compile, which is fantastic because I no longer have to compile and wait for my syntax error to bite me. So that has been a tremendous productivity boost for me. But also like navigating Mesos, a lot of the time you're like, where the heck is this thing defined? What is it? Maybe not everyone because some of us know all of it, but that's certainly not me. Like start master, well, let's just go to definition. And there it is. And over on Linux, this source code navigation actually works. You can see it's actually faster over on Linux. There's still some prototypeness to the Windows version of cQuery. But for the most part, it all just works as expected. If you saw on like the right-hand side, I'm getting these inline just information about it. It's all very configurable. It has this fantastic amount of support for finding definitions and references and symbol renaming, diagnostics. And I'm surprised that it actually works and that I don't have to grep through everything anymore. Some really, not complicated ones, but things that get tripped up often. Like I can actually say I was completely new to this code base and didn't know what try was. Well, this will actually navigate all the way down to the stout class and show me what that is. And then I'm like, all right, cool, I know what try was. It works on owned too, even though there's process owned and other sorts of ambiguous owned in the code base, it from context actually figures out precisely which symbol we're talking about and finds it for us. It works on like pound defines as well. That actually worked. And it's really nice because once I had it set up, it just started working everywhere. It made all my productivity go way, way up. And the entire setup to actually use this, if you're using Emacs, I can help you guys set it up on other editors. It's probably pretty similar. Let me go to it. cQuery. This is in C mode, turn on LSP cQuery enabled. Then you just have to have cQuery in your path or at least someplace known. I personally built it from source because I was helping work out some of the Windows issues, but they have releases that you can just download, stick in your path, and make available. And it's not the most exciting demo in the world, I'm sure, and it's not super long, but for anybody who's still grepping through the code base to find things, you can stop. You can get this set up and actually find your way around a lot more easily.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is really cool. Short question. Did you plan on adding it to like the advanced contribution guide or write a blog post for Mesos about this?
I can add that to my plans. That sounds fantastic. Yeah, I think people should use this. I was amazed at how long it took to get working from the get-go, but now that everything's set up, the fact that like we have export compile command support in CMake, so you can get that little JSON file that makes all this magic work. It's all available now. I could write a blog post. Documentation.
At the very least, Andy, if you could put it up on the contributors guide.
And there's an advanced contributor guide. I just
Yeah.
Or at the very, very least, if you could email me directly the exact lines I need to add to Emacs and where I download this thing.
That's awesome. Do.
That's awesome.
Sweet, so that was the last line on our agenda. So if we have, What?
I have something if you want.
Oh, you wanted to?
Operation feedback.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but I have something about a new feature that will be a part of 1.6, operational feedback. Let me share my screen again.
Sorry, Gaston, I forgot.
No problem. I was happy, but then I decided to present anyway. Okay, so I only have a few slides. I didn't prepare much, and I hope I will have a demo and a bit more stuff soon. But yeah, just like a sneak peek at what it is. The motivation for this was that until now, Mesos will only give feedback for one kind of, or two kinds of types of operations, only for launch and launch group in the form of task status updates. But there are many other operations that are supported, like reserve, unreserve, create volume, destroy, and frameworks didn't have any way of getting any feedback about the result of those operations. There was a workaround that was used, or is still used by some frameworks. When you accept an offer, you can specify a list of operations, and if you chain operations that don't provide any feedback, like reserve, create, and at the end you put a launch or launch task that depends on resources created by the previous operations, then that launch will fail if any of the operations preceding that failed. And that would make the Mesos master emit a task status update saying that the launch failed, and that can be used to deduce that some of the previous operations failed, but you cannot know why it failed nor exactly which one failed or anything like that. So we wanted to do better than this. One reason is that we recently added CSI support, and that's container storage interface support, and Mesos now supports talking to CSI plugins, which can create or destroy volumes, and that's something that can fail if something happens in the plugin, or like client has to talk to your service or something like that. And without operation feedback, there's no way of knowing exactly why it failed. There's no way of getting any error message, or maybe even noticing that something failed. So we decided to introduce something new to fix that. The news is that frameworks can now opt in to get feedback. They do that by setting an ID. I will show it in the next slide. And once they do send an operation with an ID, then they will start receiving operation status updates. And they work kind of like the same as task status updates, and it's possible for frameworks to reconcile them if there's a failover, stuff like that. We basically inspired this on task status updates and how tasks work. If you want to use it in Mesos 1.6, then your framework should set the offer operation ID field. It's a new kind of message called operation ID, and there you should set a value as string, and that's it. If that field is set, then you opt in to receive operation status updates, and the Mesos master will start sending you updates, and you can reconcile them through a new API call. It's the reconcile operations API call, and the master will return a list of all the operations and their current state. There are some limitations. It's just like an MVB. We implemented this only for the V1 API, so B0 scalars cannot use this. There's no support for operations that affect the HMT for resources, so anything that's not managed by a resource provider. So for instance, the new grow and shrink volume operations can only act on default resources, so they cannot be used with this. And the gotcha is that the new API call that we introduced, the reconcile operations API call, follows a new pattern, a request response pattern, and it's the first one that does that in the Scalar API. So instead of generating a stream of events, the master will respond in the same HTTP request. Or respond to the HTTP request with the list of operations and their state. So it might be necessary for some libraries and clients to update things or add support for this. And basically, that's it. It's not very exciting right now because I don't have any demo or any exciting slides to share. But if you have any questions, please ask, and I will have something better in the future.
So this is a long time coming, so it's awesome to see this. When do you feel you'll be able to get to the default resources? You guys have a timeline for when you're thinking about that?
It depends on prioritization when we get time to work on that. We have like most of the stuff already in place to do that. We have a status update manager in place that is used by resource providers, and it has to be wired into the agent as well, so they can start sending version updates.
Got it. So a lot of machinery is there, but
yeah. We need a way of checkpointing operations on the agent, and that's it. Most of the machinery is already in place.
Cool.
Anything else?
I actually think that was the last item on the agenda. Maybe I'll look at the agenda before I say that.
If you want, I can give a short update about what's happening around Mesoscon.
Yes, that would be lovely.
Yes.
I'm into it.
So as most of you probably heard, we kind of pushed back Mesosphere Advanced, and this gives us the opportunity to actually co-locate this DCOS Advanced Day event, so kind of like the Mesosphere part, again with Mesoscon. And the current plans, so I just chatted with Kirsten this morning, at Mesosphere are sometime late August, somewhere on the East Coast. And I mean, feedback is also welcome, whether that fits into your plans. I'll also send, once I have like a little more concrete data, I'll send another email update. But so I think it's kind of nice for us as a Mesos community because it gives us a chance to focus on Mesoscon itself, like the PC stuff, the content stuff, whereas Mesosphere probably is going to help more with the organizational part due to the co-location.
Awesome. Does anybody have questions?
Do you have details about how is it going to be different from previous Mesoscons, or is it going to be very similar?
What I would assume is that as the Mesosphere co-located part is a bit bigger, we can kind of more nicely separate the Mesos part, where from like the old, more like DCOS surrounding part. But I'll update you once I have more information on that.
Cool. Do you have a rough idea of when the CFP might open?
I mean, this is hopefully, I would hope that we as a community organize it, but I would assume that we should have some more details within the next 3-4 weeks latest. So CFP maybe in like 2 months or so. I mean, it's planned for late August, but I would actually like us to, the Mesoscon CFP, it would be great if we as a community drive that.
Thanks.
It was already handed to you.
Oh, shoot. Cool. Well, if we don't have any other questions from people online, then maybe that will conclude the formal part of this meeting. But if you were inspired by any of the presentations and want to present next time, please email me. I would love that. And if you're a company with Mesos developers who wants to host one of these, also please email me. And we would be glad to scout locations first to make sure the AV system works.
I also wanted to say that Mesosphere is going to host the C++ San Francisco Bay Area's meetup. We've started to do that, and we're going to continue to do it. And I think the next one is going to be June, maybe 5th, I'm not sure, in Mesosphere's new offices. So anyone wants to come up to San Francisco, we'll send out something. But great to have you guys there.
And also thank you so much to Twitter for hosting this one. This is awesome. We're really glad to be here. Cool. All right, thanks guys.
I mean, we're done with this?
We are done with that, yeah.
Bye.
Cool.
Actually, the doc already too.
Oh, shoot, I should have totally said that. Oh, well.